Junie Byrd was sitting alone in a Lenox Avenue jazz club when a man he'd never seen before slid into the booth across from him and placed a folder on the table. Inside wasn't money. It was something far more dangerous. Deeds, contracts, account numbers, names of every politician and cop on Bumpy Johnson's payroll. The man smiled and said 7 words that should have tempted any man alive. "All of this becomes yours tomorrow night." All Junie had to do was stay home when the bullets started flying. What Junie did with that folder is still whispered about in Harlem to this day. September 1961. Harlem was caught in a Cold War. Bumpy Johnson had been home from his final prison stretch for nearly 3 years, rebuilding what others had tried to carve up in his absence. The Italian families had learned to respect his boundaries, but a new threat was rising from within. Younger black gangsters who saw Bumpy as yesterday's news, a relic clinging to an empire they believed should belong to them. The loudest of these voices belonged to Raymond Sweet Ray Maddox, 34 years old, flashy suits, a stable of women, and a crew of hungry young soldiers who'd never known the old wars. Sweet Ray ran gambling dens in the Bronx and had been quietly expanding south, testing Bumpy's borders, seeing what he could take without starting an open conflict. Junie Byrd had been watching Sweet Ray for months. He'd reported every move to Bumpy, the new faces appearing on corners that didn't belong to them, the whispers in after-hours clubs, the money flowing to politicians who used to be loyal. Something was building, and Junie could feel it the way an old sailor feels a storm before the clouds appear. That Tuesday night, Junie sat alone at his usual booth in the Rhythm Room on Lenox Avenue, a low-lit jazz club where the music was good and the bartenders knew when to look the other way. He wore a dark blue suit, a crisp white shirt, and the gold watch Bumpy had given him years ago. A half-finished bourbon sat in front of him, the ice long melted. The Coltrane Quartet was playing something slow and mournful. Cigarette smoke hung in the air like fog. A few couples swayed on the small dance floor, lost in each other and the music. It was the kind of night that made Harlem feel peaceful, almost safe. The kind of night that made men forget there was a war coming. Junie had come here to think. Bumpy's health was declining again, though the old man refused to admit it. The streets were restless. Young bloods were getting bold, testing limits, asking questions that would have gotten them killed 10 years ago. How much longer could Bumpy hold it all together? How much longer could any of them? He was reaching for his bourbon when a shadow fell across the table. A man Junie had never seen before stood at the edge of the booth, tall, well-dressed, with the calm confidence of someone who had nothing to fear. He smiled like they were old friends. "Mr. Byrd," the man said smoothly, "mind if I sit? I have a proposition you're going to want to hear." Before Junie could answer, the man slid into the booth. The man placed a leather folder on the table between them, his manicured fingers resting on top of it like he was presenting a gift. He was lighter-skinned, maybe 40, with a thin mustache and eyes that never stopped calculating. His suit was expensive, Italian cut, the kind you didn't find in Harlem shops. "My name isn't important," the man said, his voice low enough that only Junie could hear. "Who I represent isn't important either. What's important is what's inside this folder." Junie didn't touch it, didn't look at it. He kept his eyes locked on the stranger's face, reading him the way he'd learned to read men over 30 years of surviving Harlem's streets. "You got 10 seconds to walk away before this conversation becomes a problem for you." The man's smile didn't waver. "Hear me out, Mr. Byrd. 60 seconds. If you don't like what I have to say, I'll leave and you'll never see me again. But I promise you, you want to see what's in this folder." The jazz quartet shifted into something up-tempo. Laughter erupted from the bar. The world kept spinning while 2 men sat frozen in a back booth, a leather folder between them like a loaded gun. Junie said nothing. The man took that as permission. He opened the folder slowly revealing a stack of documents that made Junie's breath catch despite himself. Property deeds for buildings across Harlem. Bumpy's buildings. Bank account numbers from institutions downtown that only a handful of people knew existed. Contracts with legitimate businesses that served as fronts. And most dangerous of all, a handwritten list of names. Cops, judges, city councilmen, even a congressman. Every man on Bumpy Johnson's payroll, documented in black and white. "This is everything," the man said quietly. "Every piece of Bumpy Johnson's empire, laid out like a blueprint. The buildings, the money, the protection, all of it." Junie's jaw tightened. "Where did you get this?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is what happens next." The man leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Bumpy Johnson is dying. Everyone knows it. His heart is giving out, his grip is slipping, and the wolves are circling. When he falls, and he will fall, Mr. Byrd, sooner than you think, there's going to be a war for Harlem. Blood in the streets, bodies stacking up, years of chaos." He tapped the folder. "Or there's another way, a clean transition. No war, no bloodshed. And when the smoke clears, you're not standing beside the throne anymore." He paused, letting the words land. "You're sitting on it." Junie stared at the folder, his face betraying nothing. Inside, his mind was racing, not with temptation, but with questions. Who had access to this information? Who had been close enough to Bumpy to document every piece of his empire? The list of names alone would have taken years to compile. "Sweet Ray Maddox," Junie said quietly. It wasn't a question. The man's smile flickered, just for a moment, but enough. Junie had his answer. "Mr. Maddox is a businessman," the man said carefully. "He sees opportunity where others see loyalty. He understands that empires don't last forever, and smart men position themselves for what comes next." Smart men. Junie repeated the words, like they tasted sour. "And what does Sweet Ray get out of this arrangement? He hands me Harlem and just walks away?" "Mr. Maddox has interests in the Bronx, in Queens, in territories Bumpy never touched. He doesn't want a war any more than you do, but he knows that if he tries to take Harlem by force, you'll be standing in his way. Men will die. His men. Your men. Innocent people caught in the crossfire." The man spread his hands, palms up, like he was offering peace. "This way, everybody wins. Bumpy fades out quietly. A heart attack, a stroke, whatever God decides. You step into the vacuum before anyone else can. Sweet Ray stays north of 155th Street and builds his own kingdom. Harlem stays black-controlled, stable, prosperous. No Italians moving in. No feds sniffing around. Just a smooth transition from one king to the next. And all I have to do? Nothing." The man's eyes glittered in the dim light. "Absolutely nothing. Tomorrow night some of Mr. Maddox's associates will be paying a visit to Bumpy's apartment on 116th Street. You simply don't interfere. You stay home. You answer no phone calls. And by morning, you wake up as the most powerful man in Harlem." The jazz had stopped. The band was taking a break, and the silence in the club felt heavy, suffocating. Junie could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. "You're asking me to let them kill the man who made me. I'm asking you to be practical." The man leaned back, confidence radiating from every pore. "Bumpy Johnson gave you everything, yes. But what has loyalty ever given anyone except an early grave? You've spent 30 years in his shadow. 30 years of risking your life for someone else's crown. Don't you think it's time you wore one yourself?" Junie was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and closed the folder. The man's smile widened, mistaking Junie's movement for acceptance. He started to reach for the folder, ready to seal the deal. Junie's hand came down on top of his, pinning it to the table. "Let me tell you something about Bumpy Johnson," Junie said, his voice low and steady. "I was 23 years old when I met him. running the streets with nothing, no family, no future, no reason to believe I'd live past 30. You know what Harlem was like back then for a young black man with no connections? A graveyard waiting to happen. The man tried to pull his hand back. Junie's grip tightened. Bumpy didn't just give me a job. He gave me a purpose, taught me how to walk through a room and command respect without saying a word. Taught me that power isn't about how many men you can kill. It's about how many men would die for you. Junie leaned closer, his eyes boring into the stranger's skull. You think I spent 30 years building that kind of loyalty just to throw it away for some papers in a folder? Mr. Byrd, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. That's the only reason you're still breathing. The man's composure finally cracked. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His eyes darted toward the door, calculating his escape. Sweet Ray thinks he understands Harlem, Junie continued. He sees numbers, territories, profit margins. But Harlem isn't a business. It's a family. And Bumpy Johnson isn't just some old man waiting to die. He's the father of everyone who walks these streets. You don't betray your father for a throne. Not if you want to keep your soul. Junie released the man's hand and slid the folder back across the table. Take this back to Sweet Ray. Tell him I said no. Tell him if his men show up anywhere near 116th Street tomorrow night, or any night, I'll be waiting. And I won't be alone. The man massaged his hand, his face pale. You're making a mistake. Sweet Ray doesn't take rejection well. He'll come for you. He'll come for everyone you care about. Junie smiled, a cold, dangerous expression that made the stranger shrink back in his seat. Good. Let him come. Let him bring every soldier he has. Because when he does, he's going to learn something that his money and his fancy folders can't teach him. What's that? Junie stood, straightening his jacket, and looked down at the man like he was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. There's a reason Bumpy Johnson chose me, and it wasn't because I'm for sale. The man scrambled out of the booth, clutching the folder to his chest, and disappeared through the club's front door without looking back. Junie watched him go, then dropped a bill on the table and walked to the payphone near the restrooms. Bumpy answered on the second ring. We have a problem, Junie said. Sweet Ray's making his move. Tomorrow night. Your apartment. Silence on the line. Then Bumpy's voice, calm as still water. Come to me. Bring everyone. By midnight, 11 of Bumpy's most trusted soldiers were gathered in the apartment on 116th Street. Junie laid out everything. The stranger, the folder, the offer, the timeline. When he finished, the room was silent. Every man understood what was coming. Bumpy sat in his armchair by the window, listening without interruption. When Junie finished, the old man nodded slowly and lit a cigar. Sweet Ray wants a war, Bumpy said quietly. Let's give him one he won't forget. They worked through the night. Phone calls were made. Debts were called in. By dawn, every corner of Harlem knew that something was coming, and whose side they needed to be on. The next night, Sweet Ray's convoy rolled down Lenox Avenue at 11 p.m. 3 cars, 14 men, enough firepower to start a small revolution. They expected to find an old man sleeping, maybe 1 or 2 guards who could be easily handled. Instead, they found Junie Byrd standing alone in the middle of 116th Street, arms folded, blocking the road. The lead car stopped. Sweet Ray himself stepped out, his gold chains glinting under the streetlights, a pistol tucked in his waistband. You should have taken the deal, old man, Sweet Ray called out. Now you die with him. Junie didn't move, didn't speak. Then the shadows moved. From every doorway, every rooftop, every parked car, men emerged. 20, 30, 40, armed with shotguns, rifles, pistols, baseball bats, bartenders and barbers, numbers runners and church deacons, old soldiers who'd fought beside Bumpy for decades, and young bloods who'd grown up hearing his name like scripture. Harlem itself had come to defend its king. Sweet Ray's men looked around, realizing they were surrounded 5-1. The pistols that had felt so powerful moments ago now seemed like toys. Junie finally spoke, his voice carrying through the silent street. "You wanted Harlem, Ray. Here it is. Every block, every corner, every soul, and they all came to tell you the same thing." He stepped closer, close enough to see the fear blooming in Sweet Ray's eyes. Bumpy Johnson isn't alone. He never was. Sweet Ray looked at the army surrounding him, then back at Junie Byrd. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the distant wail of a saxophone drifting from a club on the next block, Harlem's heartbeat, steady and unafraid. "This isn't over," Sweet Ray said, but his voice had lost its edge. "Yes, it is." Junie stepped aside, clearing a path back up Lenox Avenue. "Take your men. Take your cars. Take your ambition back to the Bronx, where it belongs. And don't ever let me see your face south of 155th Street again." Sweet Ray's soldiers were already backing toward their vehicles, eyes darting between the rooftops where rifle barrels glinted in the streetlight. Their leader stood alone for a moment longer, pride battling survival on his face. Survival won. He climbed back into his car without another word. The convoy reversed slowly, then turned and disappeared into the night. 40 men watched them go, and not a single shot was fired. Bumpy Johnson watched from his apartment window, cigar smoke curling around his silver hair. When the last taillights faded from view, he simply nodded and turned away from the glass. Sweet Ray Maddox never crossed 155th Street again. Within a year, his operation in the Bronx collapsed. Suppliers stopped returning calls, soldiers drifted to other crews, and the politicians he'd paid suddenly forgot his name. Some said Bumpy made a few quiet phone calls. Others said Sweet Ray had simply learned what happened to men who reached for crowns they hadn't earned. By 1963, Raymond Sweet Ray Maddox was a footnote, running a single numbers spot in Newark and telling anyone who'd listen about the empire he almost had. The story of that night spread through Harlem like wildfire. How Junie Byrd was offered everything, money, power, territory, and turned it down without hesitation. How he stood alone in the middle of 116th Street and watched an army rise from the shadows to stand beside him. Barbers told it while cutting hair. Grandmothers told it while hanging laundry. Children acted it out in schoolyards, fighting over who got to play Junie. Years later, long after Bumpy was gone and Harlem had changed in ways none of them could have imagined, old men would still gather in barbershops and pool halls and speak Junie Byrd's name with reverence. "You know what made him different," they'd say. "He could have had it all. Everything." And he said no. Not because he was scared, not because he couldn't do it, but because some things matter more than power. They'd shake their heads and smile. "That's why he's a legend,"